Hi, vinyl community. This is Glenn, your low-end music freak. Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to my music room. Today I have a theme. Being a proud Canadian, I picked 20 albums by Canadian artists that Americans need to hear before the quarantine ends. So we're going to start with Willie P Bennett. Willie P was from Toronto, big in the 70s, came out of the bluegrass community and kind of did a folky kind of a thing, bit countryish, wrote some great songs. If you've heard any of his songs, you may have heard them from a great American bluegrass band called The Seldom Seen out of the Washington, D.C. area. They did one of his songs called White Line. Highly recommend you listen to Willie. He's a great artist. Unfortunately, passed away a few years ago at a young age, and yeah, give Willie a shot. Secondly, this kind of is like the 7 degrees or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing. A band called Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. Now, Blackie and the Rodeo Kings are kind of Canada's supergroup of roots musicians, made up of Tom Wilson, who was had a band called Junk House and had a very popular song called Shine in the 90s, which was used in, I think, a TV show called Party of Five. Tom Wilson, Colin Linden, great guitar player from Toronto who lives in Nashville, produces a lot of great albums, was on the Nashville TV show quite prominently, produces Bruce Cockburn albums and tours with Bruce. Terrific guy. Next was Stephen Faring, who's a folk singer from Canada. The three of them were big Willie P Bennett fans. So they started, their first album was all Willie P Bennett albums, and they called the band Blackie and the Rodeo Kings after Willie P's song Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. They've been around now for 20 odd years making great albums. This is their greatest hits album called Swinging from the Chains of Love. Some great stuff on there. About 4 or 5 years ago, they put out this album called Kings and Queens, where they invited their famous female artists to play on songs with them. So Lucinda Williams, Sarah Watkins, Roseanne Cash, Amy Helm, Cassandra Wilson, Patti Sciaffa, Bruce Springsteen's wife, Pam Tillis. Who else is on this? Emmylou Harris, Holly Cole, Sam Phillips, Serena Ryder. This is a fantastic album called Kings and Queens, Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. Take a look for this. I'm sure if any of these albums aren't available on Amazon.com, they're certainly available on Amazon.ca, and with the American Exchange, you'd get a great deal. Next on the list, who I think are Canada's greatest band ever, Blue Rodeo. I know Blue Rodeo had probably a bit of pockets of success in the States. This is their first album called Outskirts. It came out in 1987. I always thought that Blue Rodeo would have been much more popular internationally if their name wasn't Blue Rodeo, because I think most people think this is a country band, but they are not. They're an indie rock band with a bit of a country influence, but great band. They're kind of like Canada's Beatles in a way, not necessarily musically as well as just, they've got two main writers, Jim Cuddy and Greg Keeler. Jim Cuddy's kind of the syrupy guy writing the love songs, and Greg Keeler writes kind of the edgy stuff, much like a Lennon-McCartney partnership. They harmonize great together. The first albums featured a keyboard player by the name of Bobby Weissman. He's an amazing keyboard player, played organ, very trippy kind of organ in the early albums, much like The Doors. This song, the title song Outskirts, is written about David Kennedy and the drug addiction and eventual drug overdose in a hotel room. It's a very incredible song. You can look this stuff up on YouTube if you want to listen to them. The other album I highly recommend for Blue Rodeo is 5 Days in July. One of their best albums, if not their best. The title song, 5 Days in May, is incredible. It's almost like a Neil Youngish type song, not necessarily vocally, but after they get through the verses and everything, they go into kind of a guitar-driven ending, which sounds very Neil Youngish. I've also heard that they were thinking about this as a tribute album to Neil's kind of harvest days when they made it. Again, great album, 5 Days in July. Next, I'm doing these in alphabetical order, not necessarily in any kind of prominence. The great Holly Cole. Holly Cole's a jazz singer from Canada. This album is called Temptation. It's a tribute to Tom Waits. All the songs were written by Tom Waits. Very sultry jazz, just minimal accompaniment with keyboards and bass. Fantastic jazz album if anyone's interested. Next, my favorite female singer-songwriter from Canada, Kathleen Edwards. Now, I know Kathleen's had a bit of success in the States. She was on the Letterman show and she toured this album called Voyager, which is her last album. I've also seen her play, I think she did, when they did the Graham Parsons tribute concert, she played on that. She was associated with Justin Vernon, Bon Iver, for a while. This is a tremendous album, very introspective. Kathleen's, I understand, was just in the studio in Nashville putting out another album. She's been kind of on a sabbatical for a few years. So get a chance, look up Kathleen Edwards, Voyager, great album. Somebody who I believe had some international success early in his career as a blues guy. He was associated with Stevie Ray Vaughan for a while. I think he opened for Stevie on a few tours. Colin James. Now, the reason I bring up Colin James is because he kind of stopped doing the blues thing for a while and did, in the last few years, did more of a singer-songwriter type thing. Some great songs, some of them co-written with Tom Wilson, who I spoke of earlier in Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. But this album, Hearts on Fire, is fantastic. Album that came out last year, Miles to Go. If you're aware of Colin James from the 80s or 90s, check him out again on some of the new stuff. It's amazing albums. Next, Casey and Clayton. Casey and Clayton are second cousins. They come from Wood Mountain, Saskatchewan. And this album is fantastic. It's just guitar, basically guitar. There's accompaniment on some songs, but basically guitar and vocals. Fantastic guitar player, and the girl is a really good singer. This is a really nice album. Casey and Clayton, Strange Country. One of the great alt rock bands Canada has ever produced. This album, the band's called Lowest of the Low. This album, Shakespeare My Butt, was recorded and released in 1991 and is on Canada's greatest albums of all time, 100 albums of all time. If you get a chance to hear these guys, they are amazing. This album just grows and grows and grows on you, kind of indie alt rock, very catchy. The leader, Ron Hawkins, writes all the songs and is the singer, and he's an amazing songwriter, great lyrics, fantastic album, Shakespeare My Butt. Another album which they just released last year is called Agit Pop, and it's kind of a pop indie rock album, very catchy tunes, fantastic album. I can't stop playing it. I've had it for about a year now. Check out Lowest of the Low. You will love them. Next, Harry Manx. I don't know if any of you are aware of Harry Manx. Another Canadian. He was a blues guy who went over to India, and he studied under the VH Bott, and learned how to play an instrument called, oh my God, I better look it up here. It's called a Mohan Veena. It's a 20-stringed instrument, part guitar, part sitar, Sounds very sitarish, and he gets a really bluesy sound out of it. Harry has quite a few albums out. Um, this one is my favorite. It's called 20 Strings and the Truth. First couple of songs are instrumentals, but then he does an amazing version of Summertime, the old classic, Waiting in Vain, the Bob Marley song, and Crazy Love, Van Morrison's song. This is an amazing acoustic album, kind of world music and blues. Harry's got a great voice. He's an incredible musician. You got to check this album out. Harry Manx, 20 Strings and the Truth. Next, back to the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Lee Harvey Osmond, strange name for a band. This is the alter ego of Tom Wilson, who I spoke of co-writing with Colin James, and in Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. Tom's an amazing solo artist in his own right, and this album called A Quiet Evil is really cool. It's kind of haunting, voodoo-ish kind of a thing. I don't know, it's really hard to explain. He does one song with Margot Timmins from Cowboy Junkies, and also Michael Timmins from Cowboy Junkies produced this album. One song is I'm Gonna Stay That Way, is the song he does with Margot, and this is a fantastic record as well. Probably you guys have never heard much of this stuff down south of the border. Okay, next. Excuse me while I grab my vinyl. Enough CDs. This is older stuff now. Canada's greatest blues band, as far as I'm concerned. This album came out in 1968 or 69. McKenna Mendelssohn Mainline. The album is called Stink. Fantastic, edgy blues. Joe Mendelssohn has a really gravelly voice, and Mike McKenna is just an incredible guitar player. This album can be found on CD still. The albums were reissued, I believe. They are available. If you're a blues fan, you need to hear this. The other album of theirs, which I just got on vinyl, is called Blues. McKenna Mendelssohn Blues. Now, a lot of the songs from this album are on Stink. They're more rough cuts of those songs, but they also do incredible versions that you have to hear of Born Under a Bad Sign and Help Me. They're both, Help Me's about 10 minutes long, and Born Under a Bad Sign's about 5 minutes long. Great harmonica, great guitar, just drums and bass, very raw blues. Totally, you have to hear these albums if you're a blues guy. Last but not least, a band that I'm sure has some prominence in the U.S. in certain states is the Tragically Hip. Probably most recently, if anybody's aware of the Tragically Hip, it's because Gord Downie, the lead singer and songwriter of the band, considered Canada's poet laureate, passed away from brain cancer a couple of years ago, and before he died, they did a final farewell tour, and they can fill stadiums all across Canada. I know they have pockets of success in the U.S., but for those of you who haven't heard, hard driving rock music, great lyrics, great band. Up to Here is, I consider it their first album. It's kind of their second one, because the first one wasn't, I don't think, released nationally, but it's still out there. But Up to Here is a great album. If you're looking for a song to hear, just to hear them. Blow Down at Hydo is a great song. New Orleans is Sinking is an amazing song. Terrific band. That's their first album. They kind of did a trilogy of albums that are all just so good. The next release was called Road Apples. That's Road Apples there. It's kind of the same feel as Up to Here, and great album. The next album released was called Fully Completely. Another fantastic album. Great band. Tragically Hip. Like, they were so popular in Canada, they could fill, hockey arenas all across the country, sell out in a couple hours. Check them out. I think that's all I have for this video. So I hope you will take the time to maybe Google some of these bands and listen to them. There's some great music out there that I don't think got much prominence in the U.S. So check it out. And thanks very much for watching. I'll look forward to your comments. Thank you. Have a great day.